Okay, so this week's stack of Economist articles, it's a lot.
Yeah.
We're talking presidential elections and global power shifts,
Mm-hmm.
economic roller coasters, and you name it, we've got it.
Yeah. It's like watching a high-stakes game of chess unfold.
Right.
But on a global scale, every move has these consequences. Alliances are shifting,
Yeah.
and the stakes are unbelievably high.
And it's not always the usual suspects leading the charge.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Saiga antelope.
Okay.
I was reading this, and they were on the brink of extinction just a few years ago
Right.
because of poaching. And thanks to some serious conservation efforts, their population has just exploded.
Wow.
We're talking like a nearly 7,000% increase here under 2 decades.
That's incredible. It's a remarkable comeback story.
Yeah.
It really shows how targeted interventions can be so powerful.
Yeah.
Things like tougher penalties for poachers,
Mm-hmm.
increased ranger presence and community engagement have made a real difference.
Right.
But it also shows how complex things can be with conservation and human livelihoods.
Right.
Because the Saiga's resurgence has created some tension with Kazakh farmers who now see them as pests competing for grazing land.
Interesting. So it's like they solved one problem
Yeah.
and they've created another.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even the most positive changes
Right.
can have these unintended consequences.
Yeah. And that's something I think we'll see come up again
Yeah,
as we explore some of these other global shifts.
definitely.
Speaking of unexpected turns, did you see the article on Argentina?
Yes.
It seems like they're rolling the dice on a radical economic experiment
Mm-hmm.
with their new president, Javier Milei,
Right.
who's a hardcore free market advocate.
And against all odds, it seems to be working.
Yeah.
At least in the short term, inflation is down.
Wow.
Government spending has been slashed, and the economy is showing signs of life.
So are they going to be able to keep this going?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
Can Milei maintain this momentum while addressing the deep-seated social challenges facing Argentina?
Right. Because they have a lot of those.
They do. The poverty rate has surged to a staggering 53%.
Wow.
And that's a powder keg waiting to ignite if things don't improve for ordinary people.
Yeah, that's a crucial point.
Mm-hmm.
Economic reforms can't just be about numbers.
Right.
They have to actually make people's lives better.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, social unrest and political instability could easily derail any progress that's been made.
For sure. And speaking of social change, there's a really fascinating trend emerging in East Asia.
Oh, yeah?
Fathers are stepping up in the childcare department.
Okay.
We're seeing it in Japan, South Korea, even Taiwan.
Interesting.
Dads are challenging traditional gender roles
Okay.
and becoming more involved in raising their kids.
It's about time, right?
Right.
But is this a genuine cultural shift?
Yeah.
Or is it just like a blip on the radar?
Yeah.
I mean, could it be driven by economic pressures
Possibly.
rather than an actual change in attitude?
It's a valid question.
Yeah.
And the article explores those nuances.
Okay.
In South Korea, for example, the government has offered financial incentives to encourage fathers to take paternity leave.
Oh, interesting.
So we'll have to see if it sticks around after the incentives are gone.
Right.
However, there's also evidence of a deeper cultural shift,
Uh-huh.
particularly with younger generations,
All right.
embracing a more egalitarian approach to parenting.
Okay. So it's a very complex picture.
Yeah.
With both economic and social factors at play.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be really interesting to see how this trend evolves in the coming years.
Definitely.
But let's shift gears and tackle the elephant in the room.
Mm.
The U.S. presidential election.
Okay.
Donald Trump is back in the White House,
Yeah.
and the world is holding its breath.
I think that's an accurate statement.
What are your initial thoughts on how this is going to impact things globally?
Well, one thing's for sure, we can expect a more turbulent and unpredictable global landscape.
Okay.
Trump has already said he wants to rewrite the rules of international trade, and that's sending shockwaves through economies worldwide.
Yeah.
His decision to slap a 25% tariff on goods from Mexico and Canada is a prime example.
It seems like that move has reignited the trade war fears that raveled markets during his first term.
Yes, and the impact goes beyond economics.
Okay.
This has put immense pressure on America's relationships with its closest neighbors,
Right.
particularly Mexico's new president, Claudia Sheinbaum.
Oh, wow.
It's a real test of her diplomatic skills and could strain relations within North America for years to come.
Speaking of diplomatic challenges,
Yeah.
how about that potential Trump-Putin deal to end the war in Ukraine?
It's a high-stakes gamble, no doubt.
Yeah.
On the one hand, bringing an end to the bloodshed in Ukraine is a top priority for everyone involved.
Right.
But the devil is in the details.
Yeah. What are they even talking about as concessions?
The potential concessions being discussed are lifting sanctions on Russia,
Oh, wow.
Ukraine potentially renouncing NATO membership.
Hmm.
It could have far-reaching consequences for global security.
It's not just about Ukraine anymore.
No.
It's about setting a precedent for how the international community responds to aggression and territorial disputes.
Right.
And with Trump's history of unpredictability
Mm-hmm.
and his tendency to prioritize personal relationships over strategic considerations, it's hard to predict what he'll ultimately decide.
Absolutely. His past disdain for NATO and his cozying up to authoritarian leaders like Putin has many wondering if he's putting his own interests ahead of America's long-term strategic goals.
Right. And on the subject of uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
let's turn our attention to China.
Okay.
They're facing kind of a potent cocktail of internal struggles.
Yeah.
Social unrest amidst an economic slowdown
Mm-hmm.
that could have ripple effects globally.
For sure.
That crackdown on protests is pretty alarming.
Yeah.
And their efforts to boost the falling birth rate are getting downright intrusive.
Mm-hmm.
Like imagine government officials calling you up
Right.
to ask about your menstrual cycle. That's a level of state intervention that's hard to fathom in most Western countries.
It really underscores how worried they are about their demographic challenges.
Yeah.
A shrinking workforce could mean a shrinking economy.
Right.
And that's something China simply cannot afford.
Yeah.
They're pulling out all the stops to try to reverse this trend, even if it means resorting to measures that many would consider invasive.
It's a reminder that even the most powerful nations face existential threats.
Yeah,
And while China is grappling with a population decline,
right.
Europe's car industry seems to be stuck in a tailspin.
There's a perfect storm of challenges.
Yeah. What's going on over there?
Well, you've got strikes at Volkswagen.
Okay.
You've got the collapse of that ambitious battery startup Northvolt.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Chinese EV companies grabbing market share left and right.
So they're getting squeezed from all sides.
It's a stark illustration of how global forces can converge to create both opportunities and threats.
Yeah.
The rise of Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers has put immense pressure on traditional European car makers.
right.
They're being forced to adapt quickly or risk being left in the dust.
So this is kind of a make or break moment for them?
This is a pivotal moment for the European auto industry.
Yeah.
And the decisions they make now will determine their fate in the years to come.
And speaking of global forces reshaping the world,
Yes.
the article on the surge in organized crime is downright chilling.
It is. It's a sobering reminder that while we often focus on state actors, these non-state actors, criminal organizations, terrorist groups, and the like,
Right.
pose a significant and growing threat to global stability.
And it seems like globalization and technology have given these criminal networks superpowers.
In a way, yes. They're using everything from encrypted apps and cryptocurrencies
Well,
to synthetic drugs and cutting-edge smuggling techniques to evade detection and expand their operations.
and the consequences are devastating.
They are. Take Ecuador, for
Yeah.
example. Their murder rate has skyrocketed in recent years, largely driven by drug-related violence.
Like a whole different world.
It's a stark reminder that these criminal networks operate outside the traditional rules of engagement,
Right.
and they're willing to use extreme violence to achieve their goals.
And the article also highlights the massive scale of the counterfeit goods trade.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry,
Wow.
potentially even larger than the narcotics trade.
Mm.
It's siphoning money away from legitimate businesses and governments while putting consumers at risk.
So they're not just using brute force. They're very sophisticated.
Oh, yeah. They've become masters at exploiting the interconnectedness of our world,
Right.
using legitimate supply chains and financial systems to move their illicit goods and launder their profits.
Okay, so we got a huge problem on our hands.
We do.
So what can we do about it?
It's a challenge that requires a coordinated global response.
Okay.
Law enforcement agencies, intelligence agencies, and policymakers need to work together to develop new strategies and tactics to combat these increasingly sophisticated criminal networks.
It's kind of scary to think about, but we can't afford to be complacent.
We can't.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from resurgent trade wars and a potential Ukrainian peace deal to a baby bust in China and a boom in global crime.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
It's enough to make your head spin.
Definitely.
But amidst all this turmoil, there's one story I want to circle back to.
Okay.
The one about deforestation in the Amazon.
Oh, right.
It turns out cutting down those trees isn't just an environmental disaster.
Right.
It's an economic one, too.
Yeah. The research is quite compelling.
Okay.
Deforestation is leading to reduced crop yields
Mm.
and significant financial losses for Brazilian farmers.
Oh, wow.
It disrupts water cycles, reduces rainfall, and increases temperatures,
Right.
all of which has a direct impact on agricultural productivity.
So they're hurting themselves in the long run.
It's a classic example of how short-sighted environmental destruction ultimately undermines economic prosperity.
It's almost like they're shooting themselves in the foot, as one of the researchers put it.
Yeah. But there's still resistance to this idea,
Right.
both from powerful agricultural firms and from farmers themselves.
Why?
It's as if they're clinging to outdated practices,
Oh, yeah.
even as the evidence mounts against them.
It's like they just don't want to change.
It highlights the challenge of changing deeply entrenched systems,
Yeah.
even when those systems are demonstrably failing.
And it seems like that's a theme we see echoed in several of these articles.
Mm-hmm.
From the difficulties of reforming Argentina's economy to the persistence of traditional gender roles in East Asia.
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
Changing course requires more than just evidence.
Mhm.
It requires a shift in mindset,
Okay.
a willingness to embrace new ways of thinking and doing things.
Right.
And sometimes that's the hardest part.
But hey, at least we've got those Saiga antelope bouncing back, right?
That's true.
It's a small victory in a world facing some truly daunting challenges.
Indeed. It's a reminder that even in the face of adversity,
Yeah.
there's always hope for renewal and positive change. And that's something worth clinging to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Speaking of systems that need some reform, the U.S. Veterans Benefits Program,
Okay.
it's a really fascinating case study in unintended consequences.
Oh.
It's meant to help those who served our country,
Right.
but now some are worried that it's doing more harm than good.
I'm curious about that. What has raised these concerns?
Well, for one thing, the VA's budget has exploded to $336 billion this year.
Wow.
And this is despite a pretty big drop in the veteran population.
Okay. So where is all that money going?
Well, it seems that the definition of disability has really broadened over the years. So now a third of all veterans are getting disability payments.
Interesting.
And those 100% disability ratings, which mean a big monthly check for life, are a lot more common than they used to be.
So more veterans are getting benefits, but is it actually making their lives better?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
And some studies suggest that this generous system might actually be stopping some veterans from working and from getting back into civilian life.
Wow.
There's also not a lot of evidence that it's helping their mental or physical health.
Okay.
And in fact, suicide rates among veterans have actually gone up in recent years.
That's so sad. It sounds like they tried to do the right thing,
Yeah.
but it kind of backfired.
It underscores the need for evidence-based policymaking
Right.
to look at programs and make changes based on what's actually happening.
Yeah.
When it comes to supporting veterans, we need to make sure what we're doing is actually helping them.
Right.
That's trapping them.
Okay, well said. Now, what about that article on the corruption stuff swirling around the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi?
Oh, yeah, Chukwu Lumumba.
Yeah.
It's a whole mess of accusations about private jets and fancy parties
Oh, yeah.
and shady development deals.
And all this is happening in a city with crumbling infrastructure.
Yes!
Yeah.
Against a backdrop of rising poverty and serious racial tensions.
What struck me was the historical and political stuff.
Yeah.
Lumumba, who's following his dad as a champion of black empowerment, sees himself as a victim of the white establishment trying to bring him down.
And a lot of his supporters feel the same way.
Right.
They say that he's being unfairly picked on,
Uh-huh.
while the state has ignored Jackson for years.
Yeah.
They see it as a case of selective prosecution
Okay.
driven by racial bias and political motivations.
So it's a really tough situation.
It is.
Yeah.
On the one hand, we need accountability and transparency in government,
Right.
and these accusations need to be looked into.
But on the other hand,
Right.
you can't ignore the history of racial injustice
Yeah.
and the systematic inequalities that have hurt cities like Jackson for generations.
It's a reminder that these issues are all connected,
Yeah.
and simple solutions rarely work.
Right. We need leaders who can handle these nuances,
Absolutely.
who can
Yeah.
champion justice and equality while also making sure things are run properly.
Exactly. Speaking of navigating complexities,
Yeah.
did you see that piece on the secessionist movement brewing in Illinois?
Yeah.
It seems those rural counties are tired of Chicago calling the shots.
Yeah. They're actually voting to think about splitting off from the rest of the state.
It's a really interesting example of that urban-rural divide that's
Right.
popping up all over the world.
Yeah.
These rural communities feel like nobody's listening to them,
Mm-hmm.
that the political system only cares about the city folk.
You can really feel the alienation and resentment.
Yeah, they feel like they're being left behind as the
Yeah.
world changes around them,
Yeah.
and they're looking for a way to get some control back.
It's easy to say they're out of touch.
Right.
But it's important to try to understand why they feel this way.
Absolutely. They're dealing with economic struggles and social change
Right.
and a feeling that the American dream is slipping away.
It's a reminder that even in a democracy,
Yeah,
some groups can feel left out,
exactly.
like the system isn't working for them.
And that can lead to unrest and instability and
Right.
even things like secession.
It's a wake-up call for leaders everywhere. We need to figure out how to bridge these gaps and create a society where everyone feels like they belong.
I agree. Now let's switch gears to some of the more personal stories that stood out.
Okay.
That one about Celeste Cairo, the woman who accidentally became a symbol of the Carnation Revolution in Portugal.
Yeah.
It was so powerful. It just goes to show how small acts of bravery can inspire others and lead to big changes.
Yeah. It's amazing how these small moments can become turning points in history.
Right. Cairo just offered a carnation to a soldier.
Right.
A simple sign of peace and hope.
And it became this symbol of resistance.
Yeah. Against the authoritarian regime. It
Yeah.
captured people's hearts
Yeah.
and helped spark a revolution that made Portugal a democracy.
It reminds us that we're not always in control of our own stories.
Right.
That sometimes we get swept up in things bigger than ourselves.
And sometimes those things lead to something amazing.
Yeah. Speaking of amazing,
Yeah.
let's talk about the audiobook explosion.
It's like everyone's listening to books these days.
I know.
Yeah.
It's not just the book nerds either.
Right.
These streaming services like Spotify and Amazon Music have made audiobooks super accessible.
Exactly. And it's really interesting to see how the publishing industry is handling it. Unlike the music industry, which has struggled to adapt, book publishers seem to be on board.
Yeah.
They're figuring out how to reach new audiences and make money. And authors are getting more exposure and bigger royalties.
So it's a win-win for everyone.
It's a testament to the power of technology
Yeah.
to make knowledge and entertainment available to everyone.
And speaking of adapting to change, the social media world is constantly changing too.
Definitely.
TikTok is really trying to figure out social commerce.
Yeah. They're blending entertainment and online shopping.
Can you imagine scrolling through TikTok
Right?
and then just buying stuff that you see?
It could totally change how we shop.
Yeah.
Make it more impulsive.
Right.
More integrated into our lives.
I bet businesses are really excited about that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They want to tap into TikTok's global reach.
Right.
And its ability to influence people.
But it seems like there are some hurdles.
There are consumers in the West, especially in the U.S., are still more comfortable shopping on those familiar platforms.
Right, like Amazon and eBay.
It's about trust and familiarity.
Yeah. We're used to those sites.
Right. With their secure payment systems and familiar interfaces.
So if TikTok wants to be a big player, they've got to overcome those issues.
They have to convince people that buying through their app is safe and easy.
It'll be interesting to see what happens.
It will. And speaking of interesting developments, that article on America's role in Africa really caught my eye.
Oh, yeah. What do you think?
It seems like pragmatism is winning over ideology in this new era of U.S. foreign policy.
That's a good point. Like the article about Angola.
Exactly. Despite concerns about human rights and corruption,
Right.
the U.S. is getting closer to Angola,
I guess-
recognizing its strategic importance in a region where China and Russia are competing for influence.
Right.
And that huge investment in the Libido Economic Corridor,
Sounds big.
that's a major infrastructure project aimed at connecting Angola to its neighbors and boosting regional trade.
Yeah.
It shows that the U.S. is serious about its long-term plans in Africa.
So it's a definite shift in strategy.
It is. They're realizing that they can't ignore Africa's growing economic and geopolitical power.
Right.
And they're willing to engage with governments that might not share their values,
Even if it's a little uncomfortable.
if it serves their interests.
Yeah. It's a tricky balance, though.
It is.
Yeah.
Will they sacrifice human rights and democratic values for this?
It'll be really interesting to see how this plays out.
Definitely. But for now, let's shift focus to another cool story.
Okay.
Nitin Gadkari as a potential successor to Narendra Modi in India.
Oh, yeah. This is where things get spicy.
Gadkari is kind of a wild card,
Huh?
a maverick within Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party.
Interesting.
He's been praised for his ability to push through big infrastructure projects, but also sidelined for speaking his mind, even when it goes against the party line.
So he gets things done,
Yeah,
but he's not afraid to ruffle some feathers.
exactly.
So why is he a potential threat to Modi?
He's known for his pragmatism
Okay.
and his willingness to work with the other side,
Right.
which makes him a potential problem for the more ideologically driven Modi and his inner circle.
Okay.
And the recent stuff with Gautam Adani
Yeah, Modi's close business buddy.
has really shaken things up,
Right.
creating an opportunity for Gadkari.
It sounds like Indian politics is getting pretty intense.
Gadkari, with his reputation for getting things done
Yeah.
and his ability to connect with voters, could be a real force if he challenges Modi.
He's definitely someone to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. Now, let's take a break from all the serious stuff
Okay.
and talk about something a little more fun.
I like it.
Car dashboards.
Okay, that's a bit random.
It is, but they're surprisingly interesting psychologically.
Okay. What's so fascinating about dashboards?
They appeal to our basic desire for control, our need to understand and master the complex world around us.
Oh, okay.
It's like those dashboards are giving us constant information,
Right.
reassuring us that everything is working as it should.
It's like we're all little pilots in our own cars.
Exactly.
Navigating through life.
And in a world that often feels out of control,
Yeah.
that feeling of control, even if it's not real, can be comforting.
Right. It gives us a sense that we're in charge.
Exactly. Okay, back to the world of money.
All right.
What did you think about that article on corporate bond markets?
Seems like things are getting a little too optimistic.
Well, the Trump trade is back,
Oh, boy.
and investors are excited. The idea of corporate tax cuts and a booming economy
Yeah.
has them throwing money at risky assets, pushing yield on high-yield bonds way down.
It seems like the markets are driven by emotions,
They often are, by hope and fear.
more than just facts and figures.
It's like a roller coaster,
Okay.
thrilling on the way up,
Right.
but scary when it starts going down.
So be careful out there, folks.
Always a good idea to be cautious.
Yeah.
And remember that what goes up must come down. Speaking of things that can go up and down, we can't forget about government debt.
Right. It's like a ticking time bomb.
With deficits growing in countries all over the world,
Yeah.
the US, Europe, China, India,
Yeah.
there's this growing worry about a debt crisis.
It does feel like we're just piling on more and more debt,
Right.
hoping we'll figure out how to pay for it all later.
But at some point, something has to give.
Yeah. How long can governments keep borrowing and spending like this
Exactly.
before it all becomes too much?
And what happens to the global economy if these debt bubbles burst?
Right. It could trigger all sorts of problems.
Financial crises, currency devaluations,
Yeah.
economic hardship.
Okay, well, let's move on to something a little less gloomy.
Okay.
That piece on making corporate rules less painful was a nice change of pace.
It is a good reminder that simple solutions can be really effective
Right.
instead of getting lost in bureaucracy. Managers can make things better by cutting out unnecessary rules, streamlining processes,
Alright.
and letting their employees take charge.
It's like decluttering your mind,
Yeah.
making space for new ideas.
Speaking of new ideas,
Yeah,
the world of AI is just exploding with possibilities.
it is. But that article about Elon Musk and OpenAI,
Oh, yeah.
it sounds like a real Silicon Valley drama.
It's a battle of the tech giants.
So what happened?
Musk, who helped start OpenAI but then left,
Right.
is now saying they've gone off track.
Okay.
He says they were supposed to focus on safe and beneficial AI,
Mm-hmm.
but now he thinks they're too focused on money and are rushing ahead without thinking about the risks.
And he's not just complaining on Twitter.
No. He's using his influence to get regulators to look into OpenAI.
Wow. So there are some hard feelings there.
It shows how personal rivalries and power struggles can affect even cutting-edge technology.
Right.
And it raises some big questions about who controls AI.
Yeah. Especially as it gets more powerful and more involved in our lives
We need to have these discussions now.
before it's too late.
Exactly. The future of AI is being decided right now.
Okay, let's shift to a story that's both inspiring and really sad.
Okay.
The fight against neglected tropical diseases in Africa.
It's a reminder that while we focus on the big-name diseases,
Right.
millions of people are suffering from conditions that don't get much attention or funding.
Yeah. But there are people working hard to fix this.
There are organizations like the DNDi that
Okay.
are developing new treatments, doing clinical trials, and working to get these medicines to those who need them.
It's a testament to human ingenuity and compassion.
It is.
That even with huge challenges,
Right.
people can make a difference.
Speaking of challenges,
Yeah.
the story of Hong Kong's property slump is a warning about how fragile success can be.
Things change so quickly.
It's a big change from the boom times just a few years ago.
Right.
Higher interest rates, political uncertainty, and a shrinking workforce have all caused property values to drop.
It's a reminder that even the strongest economies
Right.
can be affected by global trends and domestic policies.
And it shows how important it is to be adaptable
Yeah.
and resilient in a world that's always changing.
If you're not paying attention, things can go downhill fast.
Complacency can be dangerous.
So what have we learned from this week's stack of Economist articles?
We've seen how global power dynamics are shifting
Yeah.
from trade wars to political instability.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen unexpected wins, like the Saiga antelopes come back.
That was a good one.
And we've seen how individuals are adapting to change.
From fathers taking on more childcare
Right.
to scientists fighting deforestation.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. But that's what makes exploring these topics so interesting.
It's about understanding the world around us.
Exactly. So keep those minds curious, folks, and we'll catch you next time.
See you then.